She put her hand on his shoulder, and she pushed. Not hard, just the way you move something that's in your way. Excuse me, you're in my seat. He was sitting in 1A. He had a boarding pass in his hand that said 1A. He held it out to her. She didn't look at it. Neither did the flight attendant. Either did the purser, who arrived 30 seconds later and decided in 3 seconds who was lying. 5 times that piece of paper was offered. 5 times nobody read it. And the strange thing, the thing that made a 17-year-old girl in row 4 quietly hit record, was that the man in the hoodie never raised his voice, never argued. I just watched, like he was counting. Behind him, the purser keyed his radio. Security, first class. The man in 1A closed his book and reached into his pocket. Atlanta. 6:47 a.m. The airport smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air, the kind of smell that hits you before your eyes adjust, before your brain catches up to where you are and why. Darnell Calloway stood in line at the coffee kiosk, third from the front. No one looked at him twice, which was exactly the point. Hoodie, gray. Washed so many times the drawstrings had frayed at the ends. Jeans that fit old argument. Comfortable because you'd been through it enough times that the fight had gone out of them. Sneakers with a crease across the left toe where he'd kicked a door open one too many times. A backpack. Canvas. One broken zipper on the left pocket. He hadn't fixed it. He kept telling himself he would. He wouldn't. The woman behind him was on the phone, talking loudly about quarterly projections. The man in front was wrangling a stroller and a carry-on, a toddler, who had decided that the floor was more interesting than standing upright. Darnell smiled at the toddler. The toddler stared back with the unblinking intensity of a tiny judge. He looked away first. Next, he stepped forward, ordered a medium dark roast, no sugar, no room for cream, paid in cash, old habit from the years when cash was all he had. Stepped to the side, checked his phone. 4 missed calls, 2 from Patricia Holloway, head of legal. 1 from Janet Summers in HR, 1 from Raymond Cole at Media Relations. He didn't call any of them back. Not yet. He had a plane to catch. The call he did make was to his son, Marcus, 20 years old, University of Michigan, studying engineering, because Darnell had pushed him towards something practical, and Marcus had agreed just to end the conversation. The phone rang twice. Dad, it's 7 in the morning, 6:52. That's still morning. How'd the exam go? A pause, the kind that means something. It went, Marcus. I passed, I think. The professor does this thing where he looks at you while you're handing it in and you can't tell if that's good or if you're about to fail. You passed. You don't know that. I know you. You passed. Another pause. Softer this time. You on the road? Commercial? Commercial. Dad. His son's voice dropped into that specific frequency of exasperation he'd inherited from his mother and deployed with devastating accuracy. You own the airline. I know. Have a Gulfstream sitting in a hangar. Marcus, I'm just saying. I'll call you when I land. He heard his son shaking his head through the phone. That was also inherited. Fine, love you. Love you too. He hung up, took a sip of coffee, watched the terminal move. That was the thing about airports at 7 in the morning. Everyone was in motion, but no one was really there yet. Still somewhere between the bed they'd left and the place they were going. Still half asleep. Still human in the unguarded, unperformed way that people only are when they think no one's watching. Darnell watched because this was the job. Not the board meetings, not the earnings calls, not the press conferences where he stood at a podium in a suit that cost more than his first car. This, walking through his own airport the way 43,000 passengers did every single day, standing in the same lines, drinking the same coffee, breathing the same recycled air, seeing what they saw, feeling what they felt. He'd started doing it 5 years ago, without telling anyone, not HR. Not his assistant, just him and a boarding pass under his real name, which meant nothing to anyone who hadn't Googled it. He had a folder on his laptop labeled Field Notes, 47 entries going back to 2019. Today would be number 40. He finished his coffee, picked up his backpack, started walking toward gate A12. He didn't see her until the boarding line, but she had seen everyone before she even got through the door. That was Sylvia Brandt's gift, or her weapon. Depending on how you looked at it. She moved through the terminal the way expensive things move. Like the space around her had been prearranged. Like the crowd parted not because she asked, but because her presence implied they should. 54 years old. Burberry trench coat. Rimowa carry-on in polished aluminum. Hair the color of professional maintenance. a diamond bracelet that caught the terminal light and threw small pieces of it across the floor in front of her. Phone pressed to her ear. Had been since security, probably. No, Brandon, listen to me. The whole campaign is built on authenticity. If we lead with the celebrity endorsement, we lose the authenticity. And if we lose the authenticity, she stopped walking long enough to close her eyes and breathe through her nose. The way you do when you're talking to someone who is not getting it, and you have run out of diplomatic ways to say so. Right, exactly. So hold everything until I get to New York. She ended the call, looked at the boarding line, sighed like it had personally failed her, joined the back, pulled out her phone again and opened LinkedIn, scrolled to her own profile, read her own summary the way people reread sent messages to make sure they'd landed right. Senior VP, Brand Strategy, champion of inclusive leadership, committed to building workplaces where every voice is heard. She'd written it herself. She was proud of it. She posted about DEI twice a week, shared articles, added thoughtful comments, used all the right language every time. She believed it. In the abstract, nearby a 17-year-old named Zoe Hartman adjusted the angle on her camera phone. University of Michigan hoodie, hair in a messy bun. She was supposed to be making a travel vlog, her first solo trip to visit her sister in New York. She had a shot list saved in her notes app. Shots to get. Takeoff wing view. Sky through window. Me looking thoughtful and cinematic. She was checking the frame when the woman in the Berber coat walked past. Something about the way she shoved made Zoe's thumb hover over the record button. Good instincts. That kid. She didn't press it. Not yet. Darnell boarded early. I always boarded early on field assessment days. I gave him time to settle. Observe the crew. Watch the cabin fill the way water fills a space, finding every corner, every crack, every gap that someone had forgotten to seal. He found seat 1, stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, sat down, pulled out a worn paperback, Warmth of Others, by Isabel Wilkerson. He'd read it 3 times. A cod knife in the bag specifically for flights. The seat was good. Why? Real leather. Good lumbar support. He knew he'd speak it himself. But what he was checking was the temperature, the lighting, whether the reading light flickered when you turned it on, whether the seat recline mechanism caught on the way back. He pulled out a small notebook, made a note. Reading light, slight delay. Check batch. Closed the notebook, opened his book. The cabin was still mostly empty, just the quiet before the flood. The distant sound of engines warming somewhere outside and the soft domestic clatter of the galley. He noticed the small cart on the headrest before he'd sat down, reserved, executive travel. He'd never actually sat in this specific seat during a field assessment before. Interesting detail. He made another note. Then Eleanor Marsh found seat 1B, 71 years old, white hair cut close, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a canvas tote from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute over one shoulder. She stowed the tote with calm efficiency, sat down, opened a thick biography, dog-eared, heavily annotated, the spine cracked in 3 places from years of being read and reread. She looked at Darnell. He looked up from his page. She gave him the nod that people who read books on airplanes give each other. The one that means we are the same kind of people, you and I. He nodded back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Walter Simmons found seat 2C, 67 years old, silver-haired. He wore a blazer on planes because he'd grown up in an era when that was just what you did, and some habits outlast their reasons. He settled in with the deliberateness of someone whose knees had strong opinions about seat pitch. He opened the Wall Street Journal on his tablet. I did not start reading it. He was watching. Walter Simmons had spent 30 years as CFO of a construction company in Charlotte. He had seen discrimination in conference rooms and parking lots, and in the quiet moments when someone said something then said, I didn't mean it like that, and you had to decide how many battles you could afford that week. He had let too many moments pass. I carried them still. Zoe Hartman settled into 4C, camera out, already adjusting angles. She was there to film a wing view, until she wasn't. Seat Brant reached first class. She checked her boarding pass. Seat 1A, looked at the row, looked at the man in 1A. Her eyes moved over Darnell the way a real estate agent moves through a house they've already decided to pass on. Quick. Conclusion first. The tour just confirming what was already decided before it started. Hoodie, canvas backpack shoved overhead. Not a Toomey, not even a set of Samsonite. Frayed zipper, jeans, worn sneakers, and in his hands a paperback, library worn. Not the kind of thing you pick up at the airport gift shop on the way to catch a flight. Then she saw the card on the headrest. Executive travel. She stopped. Something moved across her face. A flicker, recognition maybe, or the specific expression of a decision being made so quickly it barely registers as a decision at all. She reached out with 2 fingers, moved the card from the headrest, and tucked it into the seat pocket in front of the empty seat beside her. Out of sight. Then she placed her hand on Darnell's shoulder, and she pushed. Not violently, not dramatically. Just the way you move something that's in your space, the casual pressure of someone who has never had to ask. "Excuse me," she said, like she was asking him to step off an elevator. "You're in my seat." Darnell looked up, closed his book. He was calm. The way deep water is calm, still on the surface and moving in ways you cannot see underneath. "I don't think so," he said. "Quiet, level. This is 1A, my assigned seat." "Well," she gestured vaguely, like the gesture was the argument. "I have 1A as well, and I've been Platinum Elite for 11 years. So, like that was a sentence. Like so was a verdict and a gavel and a door closing all at once. Darnell reached into his breast pocket, produced his boarding pass. On A, Darnell Calloway, Apex Airways Flight 21V, Atlanta to JFK, held it out. Sylvia looked at the boarding pass, looked at him, looked at the boarding pass again, and here was the thing. The thing that Zoe Hartman caught on camera, because the girl had already hit record and was already zooming in with the instinct of someone who would one day be very good at her job. Sylvia did not take the boarding pass, did not read it, just said, "There's clearly been a mix-up." Like the mix-up was his. Like the boarding pass in his extended hand was not a boarding pass but an elaborate piece of fiction that a man in a hoodie had constructed to claim a seat that was obviously, self-evidently, not meant for him. Darnell kept his hand extended, kept his face still. "There's no mix-up," he said. "This is my seat." Megan Aldridge appeared at his left shoulder like a footnote. 34. Brown hair in a ponytail, 6 years flying for Apex. A smile she had been trained to deploy in moments of passenger conflict. Bright, professionally apologetic, calibrated to diffuse. She looked at Sylvia, looked at Darnell. The calculation she ran was fast, unconscious, the kind that happens below the level of intention, below awareness itself. Burberry coat, diamond bracelet, Platinum Elite for 11 years. Hoodie, Canada's backpack, library book. "Sir," she said, and the word landed with the particular weight of a word that means something other than what it says. "I think there may have been a mistake with your booking. Economy class is toward the rear of the aircraft." "This is a first-class boarding pass," Darnell said. Still calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of something, but the presence of something held very deliberately in place. "The seat number is 1A. Megan smiled her diffusing smile. "I understand, sir, but you get the boarding pass." Not a question, a request, quiet and exact. Megan looked at his extended hand, looked at the document, did not take it. "Sir, I really think if you check your booking confirmation." "I have checked my booking confirmation. That's how I knew to sit here." "Perhaps you accidentally booked first class." "Yes, because I purchased a first-class ticket." Sylvia made a sound, the sound of someone who has been inconvenienced past their tolerance for it. "Is there a supervisor available? I have a connecting flight and I'd really like to resolve this before we push back." As if she hadn't started it, as if it had originated elsewhere, with someone else, and she had simply been swept into someone else's problem. Hagen pressed the call button. Conrad Hewitt came from the galley. 41 years old, 8 years with Apex, broad-shouldered, the kind of authority that comes from never have been seriously questioned. He moved down the aisle like a man who had handled 1,000 passenger disputes and expected this one to behave like all the others. He took in the scene in 3 seconds. Sylvia in the aisle, Darnell in the seat. Something arranged itself in Conrad's face. Not cruelty, not conscious judgment, just a settling, a conclusion landing before the evidence arrived. Sir, he said. "What seems to be the issue?" "No issue," Darnell said. "I'm sitting in my seat." "He's claiming 1A, Megan said. "I'm not claiming it," Darnell said. "I have documentation." I held out the boarding pass for the 3rd time. Conrad barely glanced at it. "Sir, I need you to take your correct seat so we can prepare for departure." "This is my correct seat. This is first class." "I know." The 2 words fell between them, clear, simple, carrying more weight than their syllables. "I know." From seat 4C, Zoe Hartman pulled out her earbuds. She wasn't filming the wing anymore. Her heart was doing something uncomfortable. The feeling of watching something wrong happening and not yet knowing whether you're going to say something or just keep filming. and feel terrible about the fact that you're just filming. She kept filming. She told herself it was the right thing. She hoped it was. Preston Walsh appeared at the far end of the aisle. 26 years old, 8 months into the job. The eagerness of someone who had not yet learned that enthusiasm without judgment is its own kind of danger. He positioned himself at the end of the aisle, the way you do when you want to suggest that retreat has been cut off, without technically being the one to cut it off. Darnell noticed. He noticed everything. Sandra Park stayed near the galley curtain. Sandra was 42, 15 years with Apex. She'd seen things in those 15 years, more things than she'd cataloged, more things than she'd ever reported. She looked at the man in seat 1A, at the hoodie, the backpack, the calm and steady way he held his boarding pass out to a man who had already decided not to read it. And something in her stomach went cold, because she had seen a photograph. Last week, company newsletter. A message from the CEO about the new Passenger Dignity Initiative. There had been a photograph attached. A man at a podium, salt and pepper close-cut hair. Calm eyes that held the same quality she was looking at right now. The same eyes. She looked at Conrad, looked at Preston, looked at the man in seat 1A. Oh no, just, oh no. 2 words landing in her chest like stones dropped from a height. She said nothing. She told herself she'd say something in a moment, when the pause came, when she was sure enough, when it wouldn't seem like she was contradicting Conrad in front of a cabin full of passengers and cameras. Except she was already sure. And the moment passed, and she said nothing. From seat 1B, Eleanor Marsh lowered her book. She had been reading for the past 4 minutes, or appearing to read. She had actually been watching over the top of her glasses with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 35 years tracking 6 things simultaneously in a high school classroom. She had watched Darnell produce the boarding pass twice. She had watched 2 crew members decline to read it. She had watched a third position himself to block the aisle. She had watched the woman in Burberry fold her hands in her lap and perform the expression of patient inconvenience. And Eleanor Montaut had taught the civil rights movement, not as history, as instruction, as something that happened in real time to real people who had names and jobs and families, and who were tired after a long day when they sat down in a seat and someone told them to move. She placed her book on her knee. She spoke, not loudly. Eleanor Marsh had never needed to be loud. Excuse me. Conrad turned. Megan turned. I've been sitting in this seat since before most of you boarded. I watched this man sit down in seat 1A first. I have watched him offer his boarding pass at least twice. And I have watched 2 of you decline to read it. She paused. Just one breath. I would like to know why. Ma'am, we appreciate your concern, but I'm not concerned. Eleanor said. I'm asking a question. Why haven't you read the boarding pass? The situation is being handled. It's being handled without looking at the document. The document is right there. She looked at Darnell's hand, still extended, still patient. Then back at Conrad. Read the document. Sylvia made a sound designed to communicate that all of this was extremely tedious and she wished everyone would arrive at the obvious conclusion faster. He's clearly in the wrong seat. I don't understand why we're making this so complicated. Eleanor looked at Sylvia, a long, quiet look, the kind that comes from 35 years of knowing exactly when a student is lying and choosing not to say it directly because the student needs to arrive at it themselves. She said nothing to Sylvia. She didn't need to. Walter Simmons had put down the journal 8 minutes ago. He was thinking about a Tuesday in 1987, a conference room in Charlotte. A colleague, black brilliant, better than half the people in the room, who had been told by the VP afterward that he had exceeded expectations. Like the baseline expectation had been set somewhere lower to begin with. Like the surprise itself was meant to be the compliment. Walter had been in that room. He had said nothing. He'd told himself it wasn't his place, wasn't his battle, wasn't his responsibility. He'd gone home and made dinner and watched the news and not thought about it for years, until he had too many quiet evenings and too much time. I looked at Darnell. I looked at Conrad. He put his hand on the armrest, not standing yet, but his hand was there. Conrad's voice had acquired an edge, the edge that authority gets when it starts to feel like it needs defending. Final warning, take your correct seat or I will call airport security. Call them, Darnell said. Just that, call them. No heat, no aggression, no performance of fear. Just call them. The way you agree to a next step when you already know how it ends. Conrad stared at him. Sylvia said, finally someone with actual authority. She said that, out loud, on camera. To a man whose name was on the building, she didn't know that yet. Zoe Harmanson's screen showed 19,000 viewers and climbing. Her hands were shaking. She held the camera steady anyway. Conrad keyed his radio. And in the galley, Sandra Park pressed her hands together and stared at the floor, and told herself there was still time to say something. The footsteps on the jet bridge told her that time had run out. The footsteps came from the jet bridge. Heavy, official. 2 sets moving in sync. Officer Ray Webb came through the door first, 44 years old. 18 years with airport security at Hartsfield. A face that had processed enough situations to keep itself professionally still in almost any of them. He moved down the aisle the way experienced people move through conflict. Not rushing, not hesitating, reading the room before he opened his mouth. Behind him, Officer Diane Okafor, 38, compact and precise. The kind of calm that doesn't come from never having seen bad things, but from having seen enough of them to stop being surprised. Webb's eyes swept the scene the moment he cleared the first row. Sylvia in the aisle. Burberry. Diamond bracelet. Expression of someone whose complaint is about to be vindicated. Conrad. Radio in hand. The slightly too rigid posture of a man who had called for backup and wanted that to feel like power. And Darnell. In the seat. Not standing, not hunching, not performing any of the involuntary compressions that people perform when institutional authority walks in and their right to be somewhere has been disputed. Just sitting. Like a man in his own seat. Webb had 18 years of reading situations before they told him what they were. Something about this one pulled at him in a way he hadn't expected. Something that sat below the surface of the scene. Conrad was already narrating. That seems to be the problem, Webb said. Conrad launched in immediately. This passenger refusing to vacate a first-class seat. He claims 1A is his assigned seat. The documentation he's produced appears to be. I have a boarding pass, Darnell said. Still quiet, still level. Webb looked at him, then at Sylvia, then back at the space between them. I'd like to see boarding passes, Webb said. Both of you. Sylvia blinked. Mine? Both passengers. Webb said no elaboration. Just both. Darnell handed his over without hesitation. Paper boarding pass, 1A, Darnell Calloway, Flight 204, Atlanta to JFK, clean, official, issued through the standard system. Sylvia reached into her coat pocket, retrieved her phone, navigated to the Apex app, found her boarding pass, tilted the screen toward Webb. Webb looked at Darnell's paper, looked at Sylvia's phone, looked between them. Beside him, Okafor leaned in, and she saw it. The thing that wasn't quite right. It was small. The kind of small that you would miss entirely if you were looking at it the way you look at something you already believe. The confirmation number on Sylvia's boarding pass. The font spacing was fractionally off from Apex's standard system formatting. One character in the seat designation field, sitting a half pixel too high. Timestamped C format inconsistent with the version of the app. None of it would mean anything to someone who wasn't looking for it. Okafor was looking for it. Because something else had pulled at her too. Something in the way Sylvia had reached for her phone when asked for documentation instead of having it already open. The half-second pause before she navigated to the boarding pass. Small, but there. Ma'am, Okafor said. Voice careful. Professionally neutral. Could you show me the original booking confirmation? The email version? Sylvia went very still. The bracelet on her wrist caught the cabin light and scattered it across the seat backs. I'm not sure why that would be relevant, she said. It helps me verify the information against the source document, Okafor said. Same tone. Patient. Exact. Like she was asking about something entirely routine. If you could pull up the confirmation email. Sylvia looked at Okafor. Okafor looked at Sylvia. Cabin. 43 passengers. 1 purser. 2 flight attendants. 1 very still woman behind a galley curtain. 1 elderly woman pretending to read, 1 retired CFO with his hand on an armrest, and 1 17-year-old with 41,000 people now watching held its breath. The silence stretched. Conrad said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "What is happening?" Not a question. A man narrating his own confusion because the room had stopped making the kind of sense he needed it to make. Sylvia looked at Okafor, looked at the phone in her hand, looked at the screen she was being asked to navigate to. And for the first time in this entire morning, she could not locate the angle. Because there wasn't one, but because the email would show seat 12B, economy. Middle seat, the one she'd been assigned when she'd booked late, too late for upgrade availability. Too late for anything except the middle of a row toward the back of the plane, where no one who was Platinum Elite for 11 years belonged, in her estimation. She had opened the booking confirmation on her phone. She had taken a screenshot. She had opened it in her photo editor, an app she used for work for adjusting product images before presentations. And she had changed the 12 to a 1 and the B to an A, and adjusted the font size until it matched well enough. It had taken 4 minutes. She had done it without thinking very hard about it. She had not thought very hard about a great many things this morning. "I can explain," she said. And those 3 words, everyone in the cabin had heard them before, in different rooms under different circumstances, meant exactly what they always meant. Not that an explanation existed that would change what had happened. Just that she had done it and knew it, and wasn't quite ready to say so in those exact words yet. Darnell looked at her. He had not, in the 2 minutes since she spat her hand on his shoulder and raised his voice, had not stood up from his seat in anger, had not performed any of the gestures of mounting outrage that this situation might seem to call for. He looked at Sylvia Brandt and said very quietly, "I know 2 words," carrying 32 minutes of patience inside them. Webb took the phone from Sylvia's hand, gently, professionally. "The way you take something from someone when the conversation about that thing is over. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step to the rear of the aircraft while we sort out the documentation. I have a connecting flight in, ma'am." Sylvia looked around the cabin. 43 faces looking back at her. Most of them filming. Most of them already knowing. Some of them with expressions she recognized. The particular look of people who had wanted to say something for the past half hour, and were feeling the specific relief of watching events make the point for them. Eleanor Marsh in 1B. Not reading, just watching, with those steady, unblinking eyes that had watched 35 years of students try to talk their way around the truth. Walter Simmons in 2C, both hands on the armrests now, and Darnell Calloway. Not triumphant, not performing vindication, not giving her anything to push back against, just waiting. The way he had been waiting since he was 26 years old in a parking lot in Decatur, with a truck that was 2 payments behind, and a plant on a windowsill that nobody had watered. Sylvia walked to the rear of the aircraft. She walked past Walter Simmons without looking at him, past Zoe, whose camera followed her without a word, past Sandra Park, who was standing near the galley entrance. Their eyes met for half a second. Sandra looked away first. Then it was just Webb and Okafor and Darnell. And Conrad, who was still standing in the forward section of first class because his legs appeared to have stopped, taking reliable instructions from the rest of him. Webb looked at him. "Mr. Hewitt," Webb said. Conrad looked at the screen Webb was now holding toward him, the external executive app, the one that didn't exist in the consumer-facing version, the one that lived 3 levels below the interface passengers ever saw. Darnell's name at the top, his photograph, his title, his employee ID, 00000001, the organizational chart below it extending 43,000 names deep. Conrad's eyes moved across the display, processing each line. His face ran through its changes in the span of about 4 seconds. Confusion first. Then the specific kind of stillness that happens when the mind understands something the rest of the body isn't ready for. His clipboard slipped from his fingers, the sound of it hitting the floor, plastic on metal, cut through the cabin's quiet like a small announcement. He did not pick it up. Webb said, "Sir, I need you and your crew to step back, please." Conrad stepped back. Preston stepped back faster, the movement of someone who had more an excuse to stop standing where he was standing. Megan was already at the bulkhead, and Darnell finally moved. He picked up his phone from the seat pocket, checked the time, checked the missed calls. Patricia Holloway twice more, Janet Summers, Raymond Cole. He looked at each name, and then he made a decision about what came next. He called Patricia first. She answered before the second ring. "Sir, I'm on the plane." A pause. "The Atlanta to JFK flight?" "Yes." "Sauce. There's a live stream. I'm aware. It currently has 81,000. Patricia. Sir, I need you to prepare documentation. Discrimination incident. Flight 24, Atlanta to JFK this morning." He heard her already moving, keys on a keyboard. A document opening, federal FFA notification as well, given that our own personnel were involved, a breath. The crew participated in the incident, 4 members, a longer pause. The kind that means someone is choosing between their professional instinct and the thing they actually want to say. Sir, are you physically all right? I'm fine. Okay. Settling into what needed to be done. Preliminary documentation within 40 minutes. Thank you. He ended the call. Webb had been watching him through all of it, not in the way he'd been watching before. Not the watchfulness of security managing a situation. Something more personal than that. The look of a man recognizing something he had felt himself. Sir, Webb said, then stopped. Seemed to turn the next words over carefully before releasing them. I owe you an apology. You examined the documentation, Darnell said. You asked the right questions. You did what they, a small gesture toward the forward galley. What they should have done 30 minutes ago. Webb was quiet for a moment. Been doing this job a long time. I know, I've seen this before, different version. But the same shape, I know that too. Another silence, the comfortable kind, the kind between two people who understand the same history from the side and don't need to explain it to each other. What do you need? Webb asked. I need to speak with my crew, Darnell said. All 4 of them, one at a time. He did not stand up from seat 1A when he said it. They came one at a time, Conrad first. He stood in the aisle in front of seat 1A without his clipboard, without the posture of institutional authority he'd carried for 8 years. Just standing, his hands at his sides, his face doing the complicated work of arriving somewhere. He hadn't expected to be that morning. Darnell looked at him. Let the silence exist for a moment without filling it. Mr. Calloway, Conrad started. Stopped. Started again. Another stop. He shook his head slightly. I don't have an explanation that's going to. He abandoned that too. I made assumptions. I acted on them without checking. I didn't look at the boarding pass. You didn't look at the boarding pass, Darnell said. No. I offered it to you 3 separate times. Yes, and you threatened to have me removed in handcuffs. Conrad closed his eyes. Yes, Darnell, let that sit. Let it be the full weight it was. In 8 years with this company, he said, have you ever declined to examine a passenger's boarding pass when there was a dispute about a seat? Conrad opened his eyes. He knew the answer. He knew Darnell knew it too. No, he said. Just that. No, most unauthority spoken all morning. Darnell nodded once, then he called Janet Summers. I'm watching the stream, Janet said before he could speak. I've been watching since 73,000 viewers. Conrad Hewitt, Darnell said. Employee ID 40291. Termination, effective immediately. Cause documented. No severance. A beat on Janet's end. Understood. Conrad stood in the aisle and heard his 8 years end in 11 words. He didn't cry. He was not a man who cried easily. He just stood with it. The weight of a morning that could not be undone. You had 8 good years before today, Darnell said. I read your file. I know what happened with the cardiac emergency in 2019. I know about the letter a family sent when their daughter flew alone for the first time, and you kept watch over her. He paused. You were good at this job, Conrad. Conrad looked up. Were, he said. Were, Darnell confirmed, not cruelly, exactly. Conrad walked to the back of the aircraft. He would sit in row 18 for the rest of the flight and speak to no one and stare at the seat pocket in front of him and think about a morning he had been running through on a loop since the moment Webb had held up that phone. Preston Walsh came next. He stood with his eyes moving between Darnell's face and the floor, unable to commit to either. 26 years old, 8 months into a career that was now in serious question. You positioned yourself to block the aisle, Darnell said. Preston's mouth opened. I wasn't going to actually, but you did. A sentence didn't need anything after it. Preston looked at his shoes. I wanted to be seen doing my job well, as he said, so quietly it barely carried. By people, I thought. He stopped. By Conrad. That impulse isn't wrong in itself, Darnell said. Wanting to do your job well, wanting to be recognized for it. But what you do with that impulse matters. You used it to enforce something you hadn't examined. You let someone else's certainty become your own without asking whether it was earned. Preston said nothing. You're 26, Darnell said. Yes, sir. Janet. He was already back on the phone. Preston Walsh. 18-month probationary period. Full bias recognition certification required before he flies a first-class route again. Mandatory counseling, bi-weekly, for 6 months. Preston exhaled slowly. Don't make me regret that, Darnell said. Megan Aldridge came third. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her. The posture of someone who had been composing an apology for the past 20 minutes and had arrived at the moment only to find that every version of it sounded like not enough. I don't know how to explain what I was thinking, she said. Because when I look back at it, I can't. She stopped.
I look just...
You made a decision, Darnell said. A wrong one. Why? She looked at him. He held the question open, not rhetorical, genuine, like the answer mattered beyond this conversation. A Megan Aldridge stood in the aisle and tried to find the true answer to that question. It took longer than she expected, longer than it should have. Because it's easier, she said finally, to assume than to look. Darnell nodded. Yes, he said, it usually is. Janet, back on the phone. Megan Aldridge, 6-month suspension without pay. Mandatory counseling evaluation. Reinstatement consideration only if she voluntarily applies for the dignity training program. Megan looked at him. Voluntarily? I won't draft you into it, he said. That has to be your choice. Because if it isn't your choice, it won't be your change. She nodded, slowly. Then she walked back to the galley and sat on the jump seat and opened the Apex internal employee portal on her phone and found the Dignity Training Program listing and read it from beginning to end. Then she clicked Request Application, not because she'd thought it all the way through, because she didn't want to come back in 6 months as the same persons who had boarded this plane. Sandra Park came last. She walked forward slowly, stopped at a slightly greater distance than the others had maintained, like she was keeping a careful margin between herself and whatever was coming. She looked at Darnell. He looked at her. Either spoke for a long moment. Then Sandra said, I knew. From the moment you boarded. I know you knew. She closed her eyes briefly. I need to tell you something that isn't an excuse. I want to be clear about that distinction before I say it. Go ahead. I have a daughter, Sandra said. She's 12. 3 years ago, I took her on a flight, different airline. And the flight attendant spoke around her the entire time. Answered questions I asked on her behalf instead of ever addressing my daughter directly. And afterward, my daughter looked up at me and asked, Mom, does that happen a lot? She paused. I told her it does. Sometimes. And that it isn't okay. And that if it ever happens again, she should say something. Another pause, longer. And then today, I stood behind a curtain and said nothing. The aircraft hummed steadily around them. I keep thinking about what I'd say to her, Sandra said, if she asked me why. Darnell looked at Allure. What would you say? She thought about it. Really thought, not reaching for the nearest available answer. I'd say I was scared, she said, and that being scared is real. But it isn't enough. She met his eyes directly for the first time. I'd tell her I knew better and didn't do better, and that I'm sorry, and that I'm going to try to become the person I told her to be. Darnell was quiet for a moment. Tell her that, he said. Tonight, when you get home, tell your daughter exactly what you just told me. Sandra blinked. She's 12, she said. She might not. She's old enough to know that good people make bad choices, Darnell said. And that naming it is where the better version starts. That's worth passing on. Janet, he said, phone back up. Park. Sandra, 3-month suspension, 15% rate reduction for 1 year. And I'll be having a follow-up conversation with her directly, not through HR. He ended the call. He looked at Sandra. The suspension stands. The pay reduction stands. But what you did at the end, telling Webb, coming forward, that matters. Not enough to erase the 30 minutes before it. But it matters. Sandra nodded. One slow, full nod. Then she walked back to the galley and stood with her hands flat on the counter and breathed and thought about the drive home and the conversation she was going to have with her daughter that night. Darnell stood, not at the front of the aircraft with a microphone. Just in the aisle, standing, tall enough that most of the cabin could see him, and the room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when something true is about to be said, and no one wants to be the one who missed it by looking at their phone. He looked at all of them, all 43 passengers, all the phones still recording. Zoe Hartman in 4C with her camera steady now, her hands no longer shaking. My name is Darnell Calloway, he said. Clear, unhurried. I'm the CEO of Apex Airways. I own 67% of this company. And this morning, 4 of my own crew members refused to read my boarding pass. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not telling you that for the irony, he said. I'm telling you, because what happened in this cabin wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what happens every day to people who don't have an app on their phone that changes the conversation when they show it. He looked around the cabin. I come on these flights every month, he said. I travel in ordinary clothes, no assistant, no upgrade, because I need to see what you see, know whether what I'm building is actually what I say it is. He paused. Today I found out it isn't. Not yet. Walter Simmons had both hands on the armrests. 22 years ago, Darnell said, I worked in this airport. Not on a plane, on the ground. Gate C9, actually. I was a baggage handler, 26 years old, a college degree. I'd worked nights to finish, still orange vest. I showed up every single morning at 5 a.m. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the ventilation. One morning my supervisor called me into his office. Small room. Fluorescent light that buzzed. A plant on the windowsill that nobody had watered in what looked like years. He said it without bitterness, just describing a room. He told me I was being let go. He said I wasn't the right fit for the environment. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it to a point somewhere above my left shoulder. Then he put a piece of paper in front of me and told me where to sign. He stopped, let it breathe. I drove home. I sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 45 minutes and I cried. By myself. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my friends. I was ashamed. Another pause, which is, when I think about it now, a remarkable thing, that I was the one who felt ashamed. Walter Simmons unclenched his hands. I went back to school, nights, weekends. Started a logistics company out of a storage unit in Decatur. Made mistakes and lost money and started again. In 2014, Apex Airways was a regional carrier with 14 planes and mounting debt. I bought it. A brief pause. Not for revenge. The man who fired me retired years ago. I bought it because I wanted to build somewhere that would never make someone feel the way I felt in that parking lot. And I wanted every person who stepped onto one of our planes to be treated like they mattered, regardless of what they were wearing, regardless of what they looked like, regardless of what their job was or wasn't. He looked at the cabin. I found out this morning that I haven't finished building that yet. Walter Simmons stood up. Slowly, his knees took a moment to agree to it, but he stood. He looked at Conrad's empty seat. Conrad now sitting in row 18, looking at nothing. Then he looked at Darnell. I let this happen before, Walter said, not projecting, just on saying it. 30 years in boardrooms, different moments, same shape. And I didn't say anything because I told myself it wasn't my place. He paused. I want to say something today, even if it's late. From 1B, Eleanor said without looking up from her book. You said something an hour ago. Not fast enough. No, Eleanor agreed. But you said it. A sound moved through the cabin, not quite laughter. Something softer. Something that needed an exit, and found this one. Then Darnell picked up his phone and called Raymond Cole. I've been watching, Raymond said before Darnell could speak. We're at 160,000 viewers across platforms. Set up a press conference. 6 o'clock Atlanta. Full transparency. Everything, what happened, the investigation findings, the changes we're implementing. Pause. Full transparency means the stock might. Raymond, sir, we're not managing this. We're owning it. Completely. Because cover-ups don't end companies. They just make the ending slower and messier. A longer pause. 6 o'clock. Full transparency. I'll have it ready. He ended the call. Then he walked toward the rear of the aircraft. He passed Walter, who nodded once. Past Eleanor, who had actually returned to reading. Really reading, her eyes moving at the right pace. Past the family with 3 kids, who had achieved an unexpected ceasefire somewhere around the 40-minute mark, and were now sitting in the particular exhausted piece of having run out of energy for anything else. He passed Zoe Hartman. She lowered the camera slightly when he reached her row. He stopped. She looked up at him, 17 years old, a little red at the corners. The camera at half-mast. Are you okay? He said. She blinked. Nobody had asked her that. I think so, she said. Then, I don't know if filming it was the right thing. It was, he said. She nodded, didn't look entirely convinced. He understood that. He kept walking. Row 23F, middle seat. Sylvia Brent sat between an empty aisle seat and a window seat occupied by a woman who had fallen asleep before boarding was complete and had missed the entire morning with the unconscious efficiency of someone on excellent medication or possessing extraordinary willpower. The Burberry coat was folded on her lap. No room for it anywhere else. She heard him coming, felt the shift in attention that moved through the cabin when he walked through it. She looked up. He stood in the aisle. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he said, "May I sit?" She blinked, moved slightly. A man who had been reading a legal thriller in Theo's seat had already stood and moved toward the rear galley with the tactical efficiencies of someone who had read the room exactly right. Darnell sat in the aisle seat, looked straight ahead for a moment, then turned toward her. "Tell me something," he said. "Not for the record. Not for any of that. A small gesture back toward the front of the plane. If I were just a man with a boarding pass and a bag and a hoodie, if I didn't own this airline, if I were just anyone, a man with a valid ticket sitting in a seat he'd been assigned. He paused. Would this morning have been different? She looked at him for a long time. You know the answer, she said. I want to hear you say it, a breath. Then, no, it wouldn't have been different. He nodded. That's the whole thing, he said. Right there. That's all of it. She looked away. Out the window. At the tarmac. At the ground crew in their orange vests moving in their precise and purposeful patterns below. Invisible to most of the people sitting in this cabin. Doing their job completely unseen. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, My mother was black. Darnell went very still. She grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Sylvia said. Moved north when she was 19. Met my father in Chicago. He was white. They had me. She was looking out the window. When I was 4, he left, and my mother. She stopped. She told me not to tell people. About her. About us. She said my life would be easier if I let them assume. A long pause. She wasn't wrong, Sylvia said. It was easier. So much easier. And after a while, it wasn't a choice anymore. It was just who I was. Who I'd made myself into. She was quiet. She died in 2014. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 years when she died, because she reminded me of everything I'd decided not to be. The bracelet caught the light coming through the window. I don't tell you this to justify anything, she said, her voice flat now, stripped of everything except what was true. I know it doesn't justify it. I know it doesn't change what I did this morning. She finally looked at him. I tell you because I have been sitting in this seat for 40 minutes understanding, for the first time, what I actually did. It wasn't about the seat. She stopped. I looked at you and I saw everything I had spent my entire life running from, and she couldn't finish it. She didn't need to. Darnell sat with it, all of it, the whole weight and shape and history of it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, I hear you, 3 words, not I forgive you, not that explains it. Not even I understand, just, I hear you, which was different from all those things, more honest than any of them. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a card, plain white. A name and a phone number. He had carried 2 of them in his pocket since this morning began. Not because he'd planned this, but because he always carried 2. He placed it on her tray table. That's not a lawyer, he said. It's an organization I've been in since 2010. They do real work. You don't come out of the same as you went in. He stood. Whether you call them is entirely up to you. He didn't wait for her to respond. He moved back up the aisle, and behind him in the middle seat of row 23, Sylvia Brandt looked at the card for a very long time. Dr. Angela Pryor, Meridian Reconciliation Institute. Then she picked it up and held it in both hands, up and did not put it down. Darnell returned to seat 1A, sat down, picked up the warmth of other suns from the seat pocket where he'd left it, didn't open it, just held it. The familiar weight of it in his hands, the worn spine. The pages soft at the corners from 3 readings. Eleanor Marsh in 1. Did not say anything immediately. She had been actually reading this time. Her eyes moving at the pace of someone genuinely inside a sentence. But she lowered the book when he sat down. Not all the way. Just enough. How are you doing? She said. Not good job. Not that was remarkable. Not I'm so sorry that happened to you this morning. Just how are you doing? Darnell looked at the seat back in front of him. I don't know yet, he said. Ask me when we land. I will, Eleanor said, and she went back to her reading. And he sat with the book in his hands and didn't open it, and looked out at the Atlanta morning through the small oval of the window. The sky was doing what late morning Atlanta skies do. Heating up, going white gold at the edges, committing to the day without asking anyone's permission. He thought about the parking lot in Decatur. He thought about it more often than he told people. More often than he'd admitted even to Marcus. The specific quality of that particular 45 minutes. The way the engine had ticked as it cooled, and the way the apartment complex had looked absolutely ordinary in the mid-morning light, and the way ordinary had felt, in that moment, like something being withheld from him personally. He had never been able to fully explain that feeling to anyone who hadn't felt it themselves. He suspected Eleanor Marsh would understand it without explanation. He didn't say any of this, neither did she. They just sat together in the particular companionable quiet of 2 people who read books on planes and understand that not every silence needs to be filled. Officer Webb appeared at his shoulder. Sir, he said, I need to complete my incident report before we push back. Can I ask you a few questions? Of course. Webb pulled out a tablet. Sat in the empty 1C, Conrad's former position, which had not been reassigned and would remain empty for the flight. They went through it methodically. Time of boarding, sequence of events, each crew member's specific actions and statements. The boarding pass offered and declined. The threat of handcuffs. The falsified documentation Okafor had identified on Sylvia's phone. Webb typed steadily. Professional. Thorough. Then he paused. Looked at Darnell directly. Sir, for the record, you remained in your assigned seat throughout the incident. You did not raise your voice. You did not make physical contact with any party. Correct. And you offered your boarding pass documentation on. He checked his notes. 4 separate occasions. 3 to Conrad Hewitt. Once to Megan Aldridge, once more to you when you arrived. Webb made a note. 5 occasions total. 5, Darnell agreed. Webb finished typing, saved the document, looked at it for a moment. 18 years, he said. Not to Darnell specifically, just to the air between them. I've been doing this 18 years. Darnell said nothing, waited. I've written a lot of incident reports, Webb said. Most of them, by the time I arrived, there's been shouting, sometimes worse. He paused. I've never written one where the aggrieved party just sat there the whole time. Shouting wouldn't have helped, Darnell said. No, Webb said. It wouldn't have. He closed the tablet. But most people don't know that, or can't hold on to it when it matters. Darnell looked at him. Most people haven't had 30 years of practice. Webb absorbed that, nodded once, slow and full. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and walked back toward the front of the aircraft. Okafor was at the jet bridge door, completing her portion of the documentation. She looked up when Webb reached her. A silent exchange, the kind between 2 people who have worked together long enough to have a language that doesn't require words. Webb said something to her quietly. She nodded, made a note on her own tablet. Outside through the window, a ground crew worker in an orange vest moved past on a small vehicle, going somewhere purposeful, not looking up at the aircraft. Darnell watched him until he passed out of frame. Then he picked up his phone, called his operations team. The line connected to the operations conference bridge. He could hear multiple people going quiet simultaneously. The specific audio texture of a group that had been talking and had suddenly found a reason to stop. It's Darnell, he said. I'm on Flight 215. We're going to talk about the Dignity Protocol full rollout. I want a timeline. Marcus. It's careful. Measured, sir. Sir, the policy team has had a working draft for. The draft becomes a mandate. Today, non-negotiable. A pause. People writing, understood, effective immediately. Every customer-facing employee in this company completes bias recognition training. Not over a fiscal year. Not phased by region. 60-day across all locations. Another voice, the logistics on 60 days would require bringing in, figure it out. That's what the operations budget is for. He looked out the window at the tarmac below. Ground crew moving. Aircraft pushing back from the next gate over. The machinery of travel continuing, regardless of what was happening inside this cabin. Body cameras for all crew members during boarding and deplaning, he continued. Activated. Any passenger complaint involving a disputed seat, a denied request, or a potential bias incident gets flagged and lands on my desk. Not HR's. Mine. Delaney again. Sir, the union agreements on body cameras will require start the conversations today. I want first drafts of amended agreements within 2 weeks. A pause. And I want independent passenger advocates at every major hub. Hot airline employees. Independent contractors whose only job is to represent the passengers' interests. They report directly to the CEO's office. That's a structural change that would require board. I hold 67% of the board, Darnell said. I'm telling you now. Document this call. He could hear Delaney making a note. Passenger advocacy line, Darnell continued. Not a call center, an actual line. 4 rings maximum. Answered by a human being with actual authority to make real-time decisions. 24 hours. 7 days. He paused. Let the scope of it settle on the line. And I want a review of the last 12 months of passenger complaint data. Every incident that was closed without escalation. Every report that was filed and sat in a queue. I want to know the real pattern, not the managed version. A long quiet on the conference bridge. Then Delaney, what's the budget authorization? Whatever it costs to do it correctly, Darnell said. We'll find out what that number is when the proposals come back. But I'm telling you now, the operational cost of doing this right is lower than the operational cost of continuing to do it wrong. Today proved that. He ended the call, sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he called Janet Summers back. Crew actions are documented, he said. Conrad Hewitt's termination effective immediately, as discussed. The others make sure the suspension and probation terms are in writing and transmitted to each of them before this flight lands. I don't want anyone unclear on where they stand. Already drafted, Janet said. Sending now. One more thing. I want HR to do a full review of the last 2 years of crew performance reports for Flight 214's regular rotation. Not disciplinary records specifically. The informal feedback. The things that got noted and then filed without follow-up. That's a significant pull, I know. Start it today. He ended the call. The aircraft was still at the gate. The boarding door was closed. The cabin was ready. The only thing holding them was the paperwork Webb and Okafor still needed to complete, and the simple logistics of moving a plane full of people from one city to another after the morning had decided to be more complicated than anyone had planned for. Zoe Hartman in row 4 checked her stream. 194,000 viewers. The comments were a river she had stopped trying to read individually. She was just watching the number, watching it mean something. Not entirely sure what yet, but something. Eleanor Marsh turned a page. Walter Simmons had opened the journal again. This time he was actually reading it, trying to. He got 3 paragraphs in before he closed it again and looked at the seat back in front of him and thought about Charlotte in 1987 and whether the version of himself sitting in this aircraft right now had finally, at 67 years old, become the person he should have been sooner. He decided that was a question he could live with not fully answering. Living with questions was its own kind of progress. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. I want to personally apologize for our delay this morning. I'll be pushing back shortly and expect to have you in New York on time despite our late departure. On behalf of the entire Apex Airways team, thank you for your patience. A pause. Then departing slightly from the standard script. Mr. Calloway, it's an honor to have you with us today. The cabin absorbed that. Some passengers looked at each other. Some looked at Darnell. Some looked at their phones and the streams they were watching, and the comments moving faster than reading aloud. Darnell did not respond to the intercom, just looked out the window. The jet bridge detached with a soft mechanical thud. The aircraft began its slow backward crawl away from the gate. That specific physical sensation of leaving, of transitioning, of whatever this had been becoming whatever came next. Something shifted in the cabin when it happened. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just the slow collective exhale of 200 people who had been holding something for the past hour and were now releasing it by degrees. The plane reached the taxiway, turned, joined the queue. Zoe lowered her camera. She looked at the screen. 210,000 viewers watching a plane sit in a taxi queue at Atlanta Hartsfield. She looked at the notes app on her phone, the shot list she'd written the night before. Takeoff wing view, sky through window. Me looking thoughtful and cinematic. She opened the list, looked at it for a moment, deleted it, opened a new note, started writing. Not the vlog, not the story she'd planned to tell. The one she'd just watched. She wrote in fragments because that was how it had felt. Not a continuous thing, but a series of moments, each one landing separately. The way he held the boarding pass out and nobody took it. The sound of the clipboard hitting the floor. The way Officer Webb said "sir" in a completely different register than anyone had said anything all morning. The way Eleanor Marsh said "excuse me," and the whole cabin changed temperature. The way Darnell walked to row 23 and asked if he could sit down. She stopped writing, looked out the window at the runway coming up, thought, I am going to do something with this. Not to know what yet, but something. She was 17. She had time. The engines climbed. The aircraft accelerated. The ground fell away. And Darnell Calloway, in seat 1A, watched Atlanta diminish beneath him. The sprawl of it. The highways and the buildings, and somewhere below them gate C9, where he had once loaded luggage in steel-toed boots and thought that this was going to be his life for a while until something else became possible. I had not known then that something else would become possible. He had not known until much later how much of what was possible depended entirely on what you refused to stop believing about yourself, when other people were doing their level best to convince you otherwise. Somewhere over the Carolinas, Walter Simmons stood up, carefully. The way a 67-year-old man with opinions about his knees stands up when he has decided he is going to say something and says they say it's standing up because some things require that. He looked at Darnell in 1A. Then he turned and looked at the rest of the cabin, at the faces that had been watching all morning. Some of them still filming. Most of them just present, awake in a way that morning flights don't usually produce. I want to say something, Walter said. Not to Mr. Calloway specifically, to everyone. The cabin listened. I spent 30 years as a financial officer in corporate America, he said. And in 30 years I saw a version of this morning more times than I can count. Different rooms, different faces, same mechanics. He paused. And I let most of those moments go. I told myself it wasn't my lane, wasn't my responsibility, that I'd picked the right moment and never quite arrived. He looked at the seat back in front of him for a moment. The right moment is always the one you're standing in, he said. I know that now. I knew it then too, if I'm being honest. I just hadn't decided to act on it yet. He sat back down. Nobody said anything, which was the right response. Eleanor Marsh from 1B, without looking up, took you long enough. Walter said, 38 years, give or take. I meant this morning. A sound moved through the cabin. Actual laughter this time. Warm and brief and necessary. The kind that doesn't undercut what came before it, but makes room for what comes next. Darnell looked at Eleanor. She was reading again, or appearing to. The corners of her mouth had done something small and complicated. From somewhere in the middle of the cabin, a woman's voice, Mr. Calloway? He looked back. A woman in her 50s, seat 9A. He didn't know her name. She was looking at him with an expression he had seen before. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has just found the room where it fits. I flew your airline 6 months ago, she said. Atlanta to Dallas. A crew member spoke to my husband the way those people spoke to you this morning. Not as badly, but the same shape. She paused. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We just let it happen because it wasn't worth the trouble. The cabin was listening to her. I want you to know, she said, that we won't do that anymore. Either of us. Darnell looked at her for a moment. Thank you for telling me, he said. She nodded, sat back. From row 12, the elderly couple who had been moving carefully and synchronous since the gate. The man raised his hand slightly. Not to speak, just to acknowledge, just to say, we are here, and we heard all of it. Darnell nodded at him. The man put his hand back on his armrest. Zoe Hartman, watching her stream, saw the comment count change character. The river of reaction that had been moving too fast to read was slowing into something more considered. Less fragment, more sentence. People writing things that took more than 10 words. One comment, which she read fully because it sat on the screen long enough. My grandmother told me about sitting in the back of buses. I just watched a man sit still in a first-class seat for an hour and do more than shouting ever could. I don't know his name, but I'm going to remember his face. Zoe looked at the back of Darnell's head, visible over the top of seat 1A. She looked at her camera. She looked at the stream. Then she said quietly, directly into the lens, I came here to make a travel vlog. She stopped. I don't know what to call this, but I'm glad I was here to see it. She ended the stream. 278,000 people watched the screen go dark. The comments kept coming for the next 11 hours. The descent began without announcement. Just the shifted pressure. The ears adjusting. The nose tilting down and Manhattan appearing at the edge of the window. First as an idea, then as a skyline, then as something real and specific and arriving. Darnell opened his laptop. New document. He sat with the blank page for a moment, not struggling with it, just letting it be blank for the right amount of time before it became something. He typed slowly. To all Apex Airways employees, something happened today that I need to tell you about directly. Not through a press release, not through a legal memo. From me to you, in plain language. I was on Flight 214 from Atlanta to JFK this morning. I was traveling without announcement, the way I do once a month, to see what our passengers actually experience. And 4 members of our crew made a serious mistake. They looked at me and made a decision about who I was before they had looked at a single piece of my documentation. They made that decision based on what I was wearing and what I looked like. And they acted on it in ways that I will not minimize and will not excuse. I'm not telling you this to embarrass them publicly. The individual consequences have been handled directly and appropriately. I'm telling you because what happened is not an isolated event. It's a pattern. I have 47 field notes from the past 5 years, and the pattern is documented. Today gave me what I needed to act on it fully. He stopped, read what he had written, kept going. Starting today, the Apex Dignity Protocol is in full effect across all operations. The specifics are attached. The changes are real, and they are funded, and they are not optional. But the protocol is not the point of this message. The point is this. I started this company because of a morning in 2002 when a supervisor looked past me rather than at me and told me I wasn't a fit for the environment he was protecting. I sat in a parking lot for 45 minutes afterward, and I cried, and I did not tell anyone for years because I was ashamed, which tells you everything about how effective that kind of treatment is at making people feel like the problem is theirs. I built this company so that no one who works for us and no one who flies with us would ever have to sit in a parking lot feeling that way because of something we did to them. Today I found out we have more work to do. So do I. Every person who boards one of our planes is carrying something you cannot see. A story you don't know. A morning they're still sorting through. Treat them the way you'd want to be treated on the worst day of your year. Not because it's policy, because it's right. Because there is no version of this job, no version of any job that puts you in contact with other human beings, that works without that as the foundation. Dignity is not a perk, it is the floor. It always was. Darnell Calloway, CEO, Apex Airways, he read it back once. Changed nothing. Senate. 40,000 people would open it within the hour. Most of them would read it at a break room table, or on a phone in a parking structure, or in the back of a galley on some other flight on some other route. Most of them would read it twice. A significant number would save it. A 23-year-old gate agent in Phoenix would print it and tape it to the inside of her locker. She would keep it there for 4 years. The wheels touched down at JFK at 11:47 a.m., 46 minutes behind schedule. The cabin released a collective breath. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And then Walter Simmons stood up, again carefully, knees and all. He looked toward the front of the cabin. At Darnell, who had turned at the movement. Walter said, "Thank you," 2 words. Not performing them. Not saying them for the stream which had ended 20 minutes ago. Just saying them because they were true, and he had decided that true things deserved to be said out loud when the opportunity existed. Then the businessman in 6A stood, and the woman in 9A, who had told Darnell about her husband, and the elderly couple in row 12, carefully and together as always, and a man in 15C who hadn't said a word all morning, but stood now with the same quiet resolution as the others. Not everyone stood. It wasn't a movie moment where the aircraft transforms into a synchronized tribute. Some people stayed seated. Some were already reaching for overhead bins. Some were looking at their phones with the re-engaged urgency of people returning to a world that had been on pause. But enough stood. Enough that the gesture meant something specific rather than something. Darnell looked at all of them. Then he looked at Eleanor Marsh, who had put her book fully away and was gathering her tote bag with methodical efficiency. "You're not standing," he said. She looked up. "I'm 71, she said. "I'll stand when I have somewhere to walk." A real one, the first of the day, surprising him before he could decide whether to let it happen. It surprised Eleanor, too. She looked momentarily startled. Then something moved across her face, not quite a smile, more complicated than that. The expression of a woman who had hoped for exact this and was not going to say so. She went back to her tote. Passengers began the slow single-file movement toward the jet bridge. Darnell stayed in his seat. He always deplaned last on assessment days. Old habit. More to observe on the way out. Zoe Hartman passed him in the aisle. She slowed, looked at him with the slightly uncertain expression of someone who has something to say and hasn't fully decided how to. "Mr. Calloway." He looked at her. "I don't know if having the camera helped," she said, "or made things harder for you. She stopped. "I didn't know what else to do." "It helped," he said. She nodded, processing. "I think I want to be a journalist." He looked at her for a moment, taking her seriously, the way he had not been taken seriously at 26 and had never forgotten. "You should be," he said. She nodded again, more uncertain, more real. Up moving, Walter Simmons passed next. I stopped briefly, put out his hand. Darnell took it. No words. The handshake said what it needed to say. Walter walked on. Then Eleanor Marsh. She was last beside Darnell himself. She stood in the aisle pulling on the coat she'd had folded on her seat. The kind of coat people who grew up in Alabama wear in New York, because you never entirely trust what the weather is going to decide to do once you get there. She looked at him. He looked at her. "How are you doing?" she said. He had been waiting for it since she'd promised him she'd ask. "Better," he said. "Better than what?" "Better than Atlanta." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "That's a low bar." "I know. Are you actually all right?" He thought about it. The real answer, not the managed one. "I'm tired," he said, in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I know that kind of tired," she said. "I taught for 35 years. I know it by its exact weight. Does it get better?" She picked up her tote, settled it on her shoulder, looked at him with the directness of someone who had stopped telling comfortable lies somewhere around year 20 of her career. "It gets different," she said, "which is its own kind of better." She moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. "The thing you said," she said, "about the parking lot, about 2010 too." He waited. "You'd already won," she said, "before you said that. You had the documentation and the authority and the legal apparatus and the cameras. You didn't need to give them anything more." He was quiet. "Why did you say it?" He thought about the true answer. "I've been carrying it since 2002, he said, "and I thought it might be lighter if I put it down in front of people who needed to hear it." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "It will be," she said, and she walked off the plane. He listened to her footsteps down the jet bridge until he couldn't hear them anymore. Then the aircraft was just an aircraft, empty, settling. The particular quiet of a space that has held something large and is still deciding what shape it's in without it. He picked up the warmth of other suns from the seat pocket. He picked up his canvas backpack from the overhead bin, stood in the aisle. He looked at the seat. 1A, his spec, his leather, his airline. He thought about Gate C9 and an office with a buzzing fluorescent light, and a plant that nobody had watered, and a man who had looked at a point above his left shoulder and made a decision that had taken him 22 years to fully answer. I walked off the plane, down the jet bridge, into JFK, which smelled like different coffee than Atlanta, and recycled air that was exactly the same in every airport in the world, which he had always found oddly comforting. The one consistent thing. Recycled. Shared. Breathed by everyone, regardless of where they were going or what seat they'd been assigned to get there. He found a bench near the windows overlooking the tarmac, sat down, pulled out his phone, called Marcus. One ring. "Dad, hey, I saw." "No, are you okay?" About what she had said about differentiating its own kind of better? Getting there, kind of better? Dead. The email. His son's voice had something in it, something Darnell hadn't heard in a while. The quality his voice had when Marcus was younger, and something had gotten through the careful management of what he let land. Someone screenshotted it. "It got to me. You're not an employee." "No." A pause. "You never told me about the parking lot." Darnell sat with that for a moment. The bench was hard. The window beside him looked out at the ground crew and the refueling trucks and the slow, purposeful machinery of an airport doing its job. "I know," he said. "Why not?" "Because you were young. Because I didn't want you carrying it on top of everything else. Because I wasn't sure it was a story with an ending I was proud of yet. Because some things you keep until you know what they're for." "I wasn't ready," he said. "Until today, I think." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the thing in his voice was still there. Simpler than Darnell had expected. "I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you passed your exam. Dad, go to class. It's almost noon. Go anyway. I love you." "Love you too." He hung up, sat on the bench for a while longer, watched JFK move around him. The particular democracy of airports. Everyone in transit. Everyone between somewhere they'd left and somewhere they were going. Everyone carrying something. Nobody entirely sure they'd packed the right things. He sat there for 9 minutes. Then he picked up the canvas backpack, the one with the broken zipper on the left pocket, the one he had kept meaning to fix and had kept not fixing, and he stood up, walked toward the exit. His phone buzzed as he pushed through the doors into the New York air. An email. From Dr. Angela Pryor, Meridian Reconciliation Institute. Subject. Thank you. Mr. Calloway asks some woman who sent she received a fire card from you on a flight today. She did not give her name. She said she wasn't ready to give her name yet. But she said she wanted to make an appointment. We have her scheduled for next Thursday. Whatever you said to her, it mattered. Angela. He read it twice, put his phone in his pocket, stepped onto the sidewalk outside Terminal 4. New York was doing what New York does. Loud and moving and indifferent in the specific way of a city that has seen everything and is no longer impressed by any of it but keeps going anyway. Pubs and car services, and a man eating a pretzel from a cart with the focused contentment of someone who had been thinking about that pretzel for at least 40 minutes. Darnell stood on the sidewalk and let it all hit him. The noise, the exhaust, the mid-November light that had no interest in how his morning had gone. He thought about the plant on the windows in 2002, the one nobody had watered. He had thought about that plant more times than made any rational sense over the past 22 years. There was something about it, the neglect of it, the indifference to something alive that just needed the simplest attention to keep going. He had never found out what happened to it. He assumed it had died. He assumed a lot of things that had seemed inevitable had quietly not been. A cab pulled up. He got in. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Hoodie, canvas backpack, frayed zipper. Where to? Darnell gave the address of his New York office. The driver nodded, pulled into traffic. They moved, 'cause that was what you did. You moved, you carried what you carried, and you put down what you could, and you moved. The city went past the windows, building after building, face after face. Each one a story he would never know. Each one carrying something invisible. He thought about the 47 field notes in the folder on his laptop. He thought about number 48, which he had not yet written. Opened his notebook, the small one he carried specifically for this. Uncapped the pen. He wrote one line. People reveal who they are when they think it doesn't matter. Capped the pen, closed the notebook, watched the city. At 6 p.m. that evening, Raymond Cole stood at a podium in Atlanta's Apex Airways headquarters. Press conference. Full room. Every major outlet. Raymond had been doing this for 18 years, and he had never stood in front of a more attentive crowd. He told them everything, what had happened, what had been documented, what was being changed and how and at what cost and on what timeline. The questions were sharp. Raymond answered every one of them. The stock moved down 2 points in the first 15 minutes of after-hours trading, then up 3, unsettled at +5 by the next morning's open. Raymond called Darnell that night. The market liked the transparency. People like the truth, Darnell said. When they actually get 3 weeks after Flight 24, the Apex Dignity Protocol was fully operational across all hubs. Independent passenger advocates at every major location. Body cameras in use for boarding and deplaning. The 4-ring promise answered. The 60-day training mandate underway. The review of historical complaint data revealing exactly what Darnell had expected it to reveal. A pattern that had been visible for years to anyone who had looked at it directly. United Airlines announced a similar framework 8 days after the press conference. American followed 12 days after that. Delta 6 days later, Darnell had known they would. Not because of any coordination, because systems respond to visible cost, and Flight 214 had made the cost very visible indeed. The Dignity Protocol, that was what they were all calling it. What the industry trade publications were calling it. What the Department of Transportation referenced in its new guidance on passenger rights, issued 49 days after Flight 214. One of them called it the Callaway Protocol. He had specifically requested that they not. He didn't need it named after him. He needed it to work. In the first quarter following implementation, passenger complaints across Apex Airways fell 41%. Employee satisfaction scores rose for the first time in 3 years. On-time performance actually improved. A counterintuitive result that the operations team explained by pointing to the reduction in boarding conflicts that had been quietly adding minutes to departure times across the network for years. Megan Aldridge completed her 6-month suspension. She applied for the Dignity Training Program on the first day applications opened. She returned to flying 8 months after Flight 24 and requested assignment to the Atlanta to JFK route specifically. She flew it without incident for the next 2 years. She trained 14 new crew members in her first year back. Preston Walsh completed his probation. His counselor noted in the review report that he had been, in her assessment, genuinely changed by the experience, rather than merely chastened by it. The distinction mattered. Darnell read the report himself. He kept him on. Sandra Park went home the night of Flight 214 and sat at her kitchen table with her daughter. 12 years old, patient, old enough, and told her everything. Not the version where she was the hero at the end. The version where she was the person who had stood behind a curtain and said nothing. Her daughter listened without interrupting. When Sandra finished, her daughter said, "But then you said something." Sandra said, "Too late." Her daughter thought about this for a long moment and said, "Better late than not at all." And Sandra had not expected that answer from a 12-year-old and cried harder than she had on the plane. She told Darnell this story 4 months later, in the follow-up conversation he had promised her. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Your daughter is right." And then he asked her what she wanted to do next. And she said she wanted to stay on as a flight attendant, but she wanted to be involved in the training program. And he said, "Then do both." Conrad Hewitt moved to Raleigh 6 weeks after his termination. He took a job managing a warehouse. It paid less than Apex had. Health insurance was worse. He was 51 years old and starting over, and he was fully aware that he had done this to himself, which did not make it easier but did make it honest. He enrolled in an online course on unconscious bias, not because anyone required it, not because it would get his job back. He wasn't sure exactly why. He did it anyway. He thought about the day often. He thought most often about the way Darnell had not been angry. He had been prepared for anger. The absence of it had been harder than anger would have been. Sylvia Brandt kept her appointment with Dr. Angela Pryor on Thursday. She did not talk much in the first session. She listened mostly. Pryor had a way of sitting in silence that made the silence feel like an invitation rather than a pressure. On the third session, Sylvia talked about her mother. In the fifth session, she cried for 40 minutes and said nothing else. She did not resign from her company. She did not make a public statement. She did not post about it on LinkedIn. She went to work every Monday, and she did her job, and she tried, in the small daily moments where it was possible, to choose differently, to choose differently. She visited her mother's grave for the first time in 10 years on a Saturday in December, 3 weeks after Flight 21. She stood there for a while. She didn't have anything prepared to say. She said, I'm sorry, Mom. I've been afraid of the wrong things." She drove home. She called Pryor's office and scheduled the next 6 sessions. Zoe Hartman edited the footage from Flight 214 on her laptop in her sister's apartment in Brooklyn over 2 days. She titled it simply, Flight 214. She posted it without a caption because she couldn't figure out what to write. The video reached 4 million views in 14 hours. She was still 17. She had no idea what to do with that. She did the only thing that made sense, which was to keep writing in the Notes app on her phone, and read everything she could find about journalism, and call her sister at 11 p.m. Hum and say, "I think I know what I want to do now," her sister said. "You've always known, you just needed a reason to trust it." In Birmingham, Eleanor Marsh sat in her kitchen on the evening of Flight 214, cup of tea. The biography she'd finished on the plane opened to the acknowledgments page, which she always read last. She picked up her pen, turned to the inside back cover, wrote, "Tell the students this year, courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the decision to stay in your seat when someone tells you to stand, and sometimes it is the decision to stand when everyone else has decided to stay seated. The work is knowing which one the moment is asking for." She capped the pen, finished her tea, turned off the kitchen light, and back on the aircraft, Flight 214, now empty, returned to service, parked at a JFK gate for its next rotation. A cleaning crew moved through the rows. A woman in her 50s, efficient, practiced. She had been cleaning planes at JFK for 11 years, and she knew how to read a cabin, which seats had been worked in, which had been slept in, which held the particular residue of something more than travel. She moved through the rows with her cart, straightening headrests, collecting cups, moving with the competence of someone who understood that her work was the foundation everything else rested on. She reached row 23. In the middle seat, 23F, on the tray table, there was a small white card. She picked it up, turned it over to Dr. Angela Pryor, Meridian Reconciliations Institute. She looked at it for a moment. Then she tucked it into her apron pocket. She didn't know what had happened on this flight that morning. She would find out later, when her daughter sent her the video at dinner, and she watched it at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and her tea going cold beside her. But she would remember when she watched it that she had kept the card. She wasn't sure why she kept it anyway. Because you never know when something like that will matter. Because sometimes the most important things arrive without announcing what they are. Because a card on a tray table in an empty aircraft is just a card. Until it isn't. She moved on to the next row, did her work, careful, thorough, like it mattered. Because it did, because it always had. The most dangerous assumption is the one you never notice you're making. Dignity is not a perk. It is the floor, it always was.